Strange Apparitions, Nathan Peters, all rights reserved, printed in the United States of America. No part of this book may be used or reproduced in any manner whatsoever without written permission except in the case of brief quotations embodied in critical articles or reviews. This book is a work of fiction. Names, characters, businesses, organizations, places, events, and incidents either are the product of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, events or locales is entirely coincidental. Chapter 1. The recurring dream always took place 2 weeks before I left on my LDS mission. It was early July, high summer, and the sky was a deep electric blue. The sun had the piercing quality you'd find that time of year, shining down so hot I'd begin to wonder if God was actually a mischievous child with a giant magnifying glass trained on the world. I was driving a crabapple green 1997 Toyota Tercel on State Route 68 along the west side of Utah Lake. A woman named Jennifer was in the passenger seat. She had long auburn hair, hazel-colored eyes, and an oval face. She was reading aloud from an old battered book with the title Utah Ghost Towns stenciled in white lettering on the cover. The windows were down because the air conditioning didn't work, and the smells of algae from the lake and sagebrush from the surrounding desert filled our nostrils. The passage she was reading was about Butch Cassidy and his short stay in the Eureka City Jail. Eureka was one of many living ghost towns in the western United States. It boasted 662 residents, and these people shopped, worked, and lived among the legends and specters of days gone by. I nodded and pretended to listen to Jennifer as we drove along. I didn't really care what she was reading or where we were going, as long as I could do it with her. I was in love with her, and as far as I knew, she was in love with me too. In the dream, the road we traveled was surrounded by wilderness, and it would be years before it would become dotted with an expansive golf course and new homes. I always knew I was dreaming during that dream. It was a knowledge that my conscious mind, for a switch, seemed to convey to my subconscious. The dream always ended at this point, on that highway before we got to the town that was both alive and dead. I felt its end coming every time, and I fought it in the same futile way a drowning man does for his last breath before he succumbs to the waves. I tried to clinch smoke, hoping to keep it from floating away, but it always escaped my grasp. Why wouldn't I try to hold on to it? The dream was a world of endless possibilities that only a 19-year-old who still hadn't lost anything of significance would believe in. At that time, my dad was alive and healthy, unaware of the ticking time bomb in his chest that would suddenly explode and end his life. My younger brother was still alive then too, a smart-mouthed kid of 12 who loved soccer and video games. The IED in Iraq wouldn't claim his life for another 10 years. My mother was still a relatively young woman in her 50s, with light and joy in her eyes, instead of the dim orbs they became after years of grief. It was a world without loss, without decay and death. In the dream, Jennifer's eyes were replete with hope, and when she looked at me, I thought I saw love and acceptance. It would be a decade before those same eyes would first begin to view me with disappointment, later, with boredom, and then finally, and worst of all, contempt. But that was still the future. So when reality threatened to intervene and pull me away, I fought it, and always lost. A horn suddenly blared, and I looked ahead. It was a familiar sound. It wasn't a car horn. It was much too loud for that. It sounded like a train horn, but there weren't any tracks by this part of the highway. It blared again, and I looked around in panic. It sounded as if we're feet away. I looked toward Jennifer, who was still reading from the book, seemingly oblivious to the noise. A different sound then joined in chorus with the horn. It was coming from my right pants pocket. I dug into my pants and pulled out something that wouldn't have been familiar to me in 2002 before I left on my mission. My iPhone 6 Plus. The screen showed an incoming call from the name Dad. I looked again, confused because my father had never called me on my iPhone. Of course he hadn't. My conscious mind told my dreaming self. Your father was dead long before Steve Jobs even conceived of the idea. I tapped the answer icon, my heart racing as I heard a voice I had longed to hear for years. Hi, son, my father said. You have to wake up. Dad, I began, my voice almost cracking with a paradoxical mixture of joy and sorrow. You have to wake up now, he said again. You're still asleep. I glanced at Jennifer. She had stopped reading and was now looking at me. I can't believe I'm talking to you, I said to him. You're not, he answered. I'm dead. No, I said. The joy was fleeing as the sorrow of his passing replaced it. No, I'm talking to you. I've been dead a long time, Seth, my father's voice responded. I glanced at Jennifer, and her smile was gone. The love in her eyes had disappeared. She looked at me with the dim eyes of hatred that had become so familiar to me during our last year of marriage. I'm dead too, Seth, she said in a voice devoid of all life and emotion. No, you're not, I said. My voice was barely audible. It came out in a whisper. I am to you, she answered. The horn blared again, both louder and longer. This time it broke the sky and shattered the world. I woke to see my ceiling fans spinning slowly above me. I was in my bedroom, and I had that same mixed feeling of relief and disappointment I always had when I first awoke from the dream. I lay there marveling over the new addition of the loud train horn, then shouted out a little in surprise when the same loud blaring filled the air of my waking world. Horns were always an annoying thing, and I especially hated them in the morning. Maybe it was because they reminded me too much of an alarm clock, a concept invented by the devil himself. I hadn't worked a 9-to-5 schedule in 15 years, and I was just fine with that. You typically don't in my line of work. My chosen trade allowed me some benefits to balance out the negatives. I usually went to work when I wanted to, and if that happened to be late at night, I got to sleep in during the day. My personal rule said that every hour I put in past midnight allowed me 1 hour past 9 every morning in bed. I had officially clocked my hours the night before from 7 p.m. to 3 a.m. That meant I could sleep until noon if I wished, which is why the horn that woke me up at 10, as I had just discovered by looking at the display on my phone, had me more than a little perturbed. This particular horn was incessant. Whoever was honking it wanted attention. Shut up, I yelled to no one in particular. It was a silly thing to do. The only person who could have heard would have been my next-door neighbor through the paper-thin walls that separated his apartment from mine. The almost immediate banging on the wall from his side proved that he had, in fact, heard me. I didn't care very much. He worked the day shift at 7-Eleven, which didn't give him the past 9 allowance I had. He deserved to be woken up. I heard the horn honk again. It sounded like it was in my living room. I cursed and got out of bed. My knees cracked as I put my weight on them, and the inevitable consequences of being north of 30 manifested themselves in aching feet that brought a loud bark of pain out of my mouth. What was with this aging stuff? It was a thing for Google to cure with the future cyborgs I expected they'd create. The fact that we would all have to be their minion slaves in return for cyborg immortality was a small price to pay for no more fallen arches and popping knees. I walked, or more like hobbled, over to the bedroom wall. I liked it as black as I could get it in my bedroom, which was why the windows were covered in blankets. For bachelors like me, old blankets varying in color and size hanging on the walls were just fine for home decor. I felt around for the light switch and flipped it on to look for my pants that I had haphazardly thrown on the floor when I got home earlier that morning. The horn blared again. I'm going to skin you alive, I said out loud as I pulled my pants on. I yanked open the bedroom door and was greeted by the cold wind of late November. My front door was wide open. That explained why it sounded like the horn was in my living room. Early morning light streaked in along with the frigid air. I racked my brain trying to recall the night before. Did I leave it open? I wondered as I walked over to the door carefully, now on alert. I didn't have any cases more serious than a minor bail jump, just a guy who had forgotten his court date and hadn't actually meant to run out on his bail. My business partner and I had found him sitting in his living room watching Judge Judy, of all things, and eating straight out of a container of Haagen-Dazs mint chip ice cream. He was as cordial as could be and even apologized for missing his court date. It wasn't surprising considering he had been arrested and subsequently bailed out for having bounced a check to a dog groomer for $650. I had asked him what in the world would cost $650 at a dog groomer, and he had responded, an intense scalp cleansing bath with aloe plant deep root conditioning. That's it? I had asked, surprised. A shampoo and wash for $650? It made me think I was in the wrong line of work. Seth Greenwood, dog groomer extraordinaire. I walked over to my front door and cautiously looked out, expecting anything from a gang of drunken bikers to the FBI on a sudden apartment complex-wide search for Al-Qaeda holdouts. That probably seems facetious, considering I lived in Utah County, one of the safest places in the United States due to its majority population of church-going Mormons. Most of the county's rental areas catered to what had been termed BYU approved, an effort to keep local housing in check with Brigham Young University's honor code. This translated to no alcohol, no tobacco, and of course, no illegal drugs. All this contributed to the area's low crime rate and peaceful living. The apartment complex I lived in, the Provo Canyon Cliffs, was one of the few exceptions to the BYU-approved filter. It was also by far the largest of its kind. There were close to 300 different apartment units. In addition to all that, it was a complex for subsidized government housing, and this had resulted in it becoming a favorite for many of the county's less than reputable citizens. So much so, in fact, that it had its own Provo police satellite operating within the complex itself. I didn't find any bikers or blue parka-clad federals outside my front door, but I did see something that often resulted in trouble nevertheless. It was Kent Somerville, my business partner in an upstart detective agency. I couldn't actually see Kent, just his jacked-up monstrosity, my personal pet name for his blue and gray '93 Chevy Suburban. It had 4-inch lifts with 36-inch wheels, causing it to peak at the exact maximum legal limit for a vehicle in the state of Utah. Kent had installed a train horn in the truck, and he loved to blast it at anyone who cut him off in traffic. Behind the wheel, I could see an African-American woman wearing large sunglasses with white frames. She had her left hand resting on the steering wheel while bleeping the horn with her right. She appeared to be laughing with her head bent back, bellowing guffaws at the roof. I looked at the passenger side of the vehicle. There sat my business partner. Kent was wearing his customary wraparound sunglasses and was slumped down in the seat, passively allowing whoever had commandeered his vehicle to press spastically on the horn. I wasn't sure what was happening, but I knew I had to get the horn blowing to stop before one of my neighbors called the cops. I wagged my right hand in a "that's enough" motion. It didn't work. She grinned at me and answered with another blast from Union Pacific. This time it was an extended blast. I cursed out loud and ran to the driver's side of the truck. The door was locked. I covered my left ear from the assault of the train horn and pounded on the side of the truck with my right fist while screaming Kent's name. The horn stopped, and the driver's side window rolled down with an electric hum. "Don't be pounding on the truck, white boy," the woman said. The laughter and glee on her face turned into a scowl. I could tell she was drunk. When you'd seen as many drunk faces as I had, you recognized them easily. The slack jaws and small wobble to the head were unmistakable. I could also smell waves of vodka pouring out of her pores. This woman was 2 sheets to the wind for sure. Alarmed, I surmised she had been driving Kent's jacked-up beast of a truck. I hope no small children or little old ladies were stuck in the wheel wells. "Kent," I screamed, ignoring her. I hoped that with the window now open he would hear me and maybe wake up from the stupor he was in. A foolish thought, considering the train horn hadn't stirred him. "He ain't gonna answer, honey," the woman said. Her smile returned, the head bob still in full effect. I looked back at her but didn't try to talk to her. I'd had enough experience to know how futile it would be to try to have a conversation with a drunken stranger. I walked around to the other side of the truck and knocked on the passenger door. "Kent!" I yelled and tried, with frustration, to see into the side window. I could see the top of his shaved head since it was leaning against the glass, but he didn't move. For all I knew, the guy was dead, and I found myself becoming genuinely concerned. The woman had said he wasn't going to answer me. In a brief second of panic, I wondered if I was viewing the after effects of a carjacking, but reason quickly took hold. If Kent was the deceased victim of a carjacking, it wouldn't make much sense for the carjacker to drive the vehicle to my apartment complex and, just by happenstance, park directly in front of my apartment. Obviously, the two knew each other, and at some point during the previous night, the woman had probably taken over driving the Suburban. I walked back around to the driver's side. The woman in the driver's seat was now primping her hair in the side mirror and running her tongue along her teeth in the way women do sometimes if they see lipstick on them. Against my better judgment, I asked, "What's wrong with him?" Instead of answering me, she only began laughing. She was slightly overweight, and I noticed that the bottom of a small double chin vibrated as she hooted. "Seriously," I yelled, this time annoyed. "What's wrong with Kent? And who are you?" She still didn't answer me, but instead pressed the red button for the train horn with her right hand as she gave me the finger with her left. Her smile broadened, her head still bobbing from the waves of vodka swirling through her veins. Genuinely mad at this point, I jumped up onto the sideboards. I reached into the vehicle through the window and knocked her right hand off the switch, then held her arm by the wrist. She quickly tried to scratch my face with her left hand as she uttered an expletive that involved my mother, but I caught it in time and held her hand in mine. There we sat in a conundrum of stupidity. I wasn't going to let go of her hands and risk being greeted with either her nails or the air horn, and she wasn't about to suddenly sober up anytime soon and act like anything other than a maniac. So we sat there for the next 30 seconds. She cursed me and spat in my face as I tried, not very successfully, to remain calm, promising her that if she settled down, I would let go of her. I don't know how long it would have gone on, maybe until she either passed out from the vodka or I just got too tired and made an escape back out the window. But Kent surprised us both with a sudden shout. "Cut it out, Chrissy," he yelled, his wraparound glasses partly askew on his head and a bit of slobber drooping from his mouth. He was as drunk, or even more drunk, than the woman. Chrissy stopped struggling and looked at Kent. "Baby, you're awake," she said, startled. Her awake came out in a drunken garble, making it sound more like Anake. It was amazing the vehicle was parked in a parking stall and not nose first in my living room. "Kent, snap out of it," I said to him. Kent's head shifted slightly in my direction, but I wasn't sure if he actually deciphered what I had said or if he even knew I was speaking to him. I at least knew now that he wasn't dead. Chrissy, in the meantime, had quieted down and was no longer struggling with me. Perhaps the effort it took for her to talk to Kent required all of her sedated cognitive abilities. Both her arms had gone limp, and I decided to take the opportunity to quickly extricate myself from the window and back onto the ground. I returned to Kent's side of the Suburban and repeated the fruitless act of opening the locked door. "Kent," I yelled, knocking on the door. "Open the door." Kent stirred, first looking around as if some incorporeal spirit had spoken to him, then shifting his gaze through the window. I waved and gestured toward the door. "Open it," I said. He fumbled with the handle in his drunken fog, finally getting it open after several failed attempts. Out of the vehicle dropped empty beer cans and an empty bottle of Popov vodka. The bottle clanked against the side step of the Chevy, flipping end over end, then shattering on the parking lot pavement. I jumped back to avoid vodka residue hitting my feet. I looked at Kent and shook my head. "Kent," I said, "what are you doing?" "Wah," he tried to say as he slumped over and began to fall out of the truck. I immediately rushed forward and braced him from rolling out like a sack of potatoes. Kent was a heavy guy, not just fat heavy, though he was stout. He once told me he weighed just shy of 320 pounds, but muscle heavy as well. He worked out regularly, and I'd seen him bench press 200 pounds with seemingly little effort. Bracing him, therefore, wasn't easy, and I had to use all of my own 212 pounds to steady him. "Chrissy," I asked, "a little help, please." She looked at us with the same drunken stupor, not seeming to comprehend what was happening. I grunted with my effort to get him into a seated position and was losing the battle when Chrissy finally broke through the vodka logjam, snapped to attention, and hurriedly slid over to Kent's side of the truck to help. She grabbed Kent's left side and pulled as I pushed from the right. Together, we were able to force his bulk back into the vehicle. I climbed in after him and lightly slapped his left cheek as he groaned and muttered something unintelligible. "Kent," I repeated, while slapping his left cheek and shaking his right shoulder. Finally, he seemed to wake a little. He brushed my hand away. "What are you doing, Seth?" he asked, inches away from my face and bathing me in vapors of alcohol. "What am I doing?" I asked incredulously. "Trying to keep you out of jail, moron." I shook him some more in hopes of sobering him up. Instead, he slumped down again and let out a gurgle that sounded suspiciously like the beginnings of vomit. Considering my proximity to his mouth and any projectiles that could instantly flow from it, I quickly exited the vehicle and stood back down on the pavement. I rubbed my face with my hands and looked around, feeling perplexed. It wouldn't be long before Provo's finest would venture onto the scene, and I noticed we were starting to attract a crowd. I needed to get both of these drunken fools out of the vehicle and into my apartment as quickly as possible. Chrissy at least appeared to be able to do that on her own, but Kent was a no-go. I was going to need some help. I looked toward the growing crowd of spectators and noticed a familiar face. A man named Gary who once helped me change a fuel pump in my aging Ford Expedition. He had been an out-of-work auto mechanic at the time and offered to help me in exchange for $50 and a case of Budweiser. "Gary," I yelled, "can you give me a hand here?" He raised his eyebrows, then nodded and walked over. "What's going on?" he asked a little sheepishly. "I just need some help getting this guy into my apartment," I answered. "Could you help me steady him as I get him out of the vehicle?" Gary nodded again and stood to the left of the door as I opened it. Kent immediately began to slide out, as before, and I quickly got onto the side step while grabbing his right shoulder. Gary stood on the side step as well and grabbed Kent's left. "Ready?" I asked, and Gary gave an assenting grunt as we both pulled and lifted. Kent easily slid out and went to his knees on the pavement, then belched a noxious mixture of old vodka and swirling stomach acids. He was either about to puke or he had earlier. Either way, the smell made my own stomach churn. "Kent, can you stand up?" I said. Kent lifted his head at the sound of my voice and gave me a sunglasses bug stare. He nodded slightly and tried to get to his feet. Gary and I lifted as he did so, and we successfully got him to a wobbly standing position. Kent belched again, and this time I turned my head in order to avoid his rancid breath. In the meantime, Chrissy had gotten out of the truck and came stumbling around to the front. She looked at us, her head still doing its inebriated wobble. "What you doing?" she asked with slurred speech. I didn't answer, but continued with Gary to get the precarious Kent walking toward my open apartment door. I noticed stains from spilled food and beer all over the front of his black t-shirt. The shirt was one I'd seen him wear many times. It had a Mullen Labe logo stenciled across the front in large white capital letters. Kent was an interesting guy. At first glance, most considered him a biker. The logos on the back of his Chevy often got him branded as a redneck. The back bumper had both a "Don't Tread on Me" and an old Gadsden flag bumper sticker. He had a shaved head and several piercings in both ears. He sported a Van Dyke beard, and he usually wore a heavy gold chain around his neck. I often had people ask me why I was in business with him. I wondered that myself a few times, like while trying to escort the drunken fool into my apartment. But they didn't know Kent like I did. They didn't know that just 5 years before I would have been dead if not for him. They didn't know he could be the kindest and most generous person you would ever meet. They didn't know he was as loyal as a brother and as fierce as an enraged bear in a friend's defense. He had been there to help me get through some of the most difficult times in my life. He had his faults, like anyone. He could be tumultuous and intense, hence his failed marriage, numerous bankruptcies, and multiple arrests. It was because of the latter that I was desperate to get him inside my apartment that day. A DUI charge could have meant the end of his PI and bounty hunter licenses. It could have also endangered his concealed firearm permit, which could cripple a person in our line of work. Bear pepper spray may work on a cheesy television show, but in real life, a firearm is sometimes crucial to control aggressive and dangerous bail jumpers. That string of thought had me looking around nervously for signs of a Provo police or Utah County Sheriff vehicle. The Provo police substation was only a few buildings away from my place, and the train horn was bound to bring a cop to the parking lot eventually. I tried to walk faster, but Kent was moving in slow motion. Putting one foot in front of the other seemed to max out his efforts. At least he was out of the vehicle. That would have made it difficult to charge him or his newfound drinking partner for driving under the influence. We finally reached the door, and I got Kent inside and to the couch just as I felt my back start to give out. I thanked Gary for his help and promised him a six-pack of Coors for helping. He almost collided with a staggering Chrissy on his way out the door. Her white-framed sunglasses had become dislodged from behind her right ear, and I could see one almond-colored eye looking back at me. It looked as dazed and unfocused as you might expect from a drunken person, but it also had an unmistakable sharp undercurrent of intelligence to it. "You and Kent should stay here until you both sober up," I said. "You can sleep on my bed and I'll—" I looked down and gestured at the now snoring Kent. "Well, I don't think he's going anywhere, so I guess he gets the couch." Chrissy put her hand up. "No, that's a right," she slurred. "I just be here on day flow." At this, she sat down on her rear end, crashed to her side, and closed her eyes. I raised my eyebrows in surprise and walked over to the prone woman. "Chrissy?" I said, but she didn't seem to hear me. In a few seconds, she began to utter a slight snore of her own, and I decided to leave her where she was. I walked into the bedroom and opened my small wall closet. Inside hung 2 suits that I almost never wore, plus 4 pairs of shoes, 2 athletic, 1 dress, and a pair of work boots. Also inside was a stack-on gun locker with 2 brackets fastened with padlocks that I had installed a number of years ago. Inside the stack-on was a Remington Marine Magnum Tactical 12-gauge, a Ruger Mini 14, 3 magazines for the Ruger, a Smith & Wesson Chiefs Special, and 3 mags for a Glock 19. I typically kept the Glock loaded in a gun vault handgun safe under my bed. A shelf ran along the length of the top of the closet, and on that I had a few extra blankets and a pillow. I got them down from the shelf and returned to the living room. I positioned the pillow under Chrissy's head, put the blanket over her, and then put the other blanket over Kent. I looked at the 2 sleeping people and shook my head in wonder. "Freaking amazing," I said out loud, then went back into the bedroom, peeled off my clothes, and got into the shower. It was already looking to be an interesting day. Chapter 2. "I'm so sorry," Chrissy said. The drunken slang had been replaced with articulate and educated speech. I was surprised but tried not to show it. She noticed, however, and smiled at me. "Did my Inglewood show?" she asked. I smiled back. She cringed, but the smile never left her face. "I'm so sorry," she said again. "Did I make a fool of myself?" "Are you referring to the train horn blasts or the passing out on my living room floor?" I asked lightheartedly. It was heartfelt. I'd engaged in my own fair share of lampshade on your head escapades, and therefore couldn't hold it against her. Both she and Kent had slept soundly in my living room for most of the day, while I had gone out to do some grocery shopping. When I returned home, I found a sober and hungover Chrissy sitting on my living room couch. Kent was yet to be seen, and after Chrissy saw my curious expression, she told me he was in the bathroom worshiping the porcelain god. She had folded the blankets and placed them with the pillow in a neat stack on an old easy chair. I thought coffee would be good for her hangover. I had stopped drinking coffee along with alcohol, but I still had an old jar of Folgers Instant above the sink. I made her a cup after I put my groceries away and invited her to sit with me at my small kitchen table as I opened a can of Mormon coffee, otherwise known as Diet Coke. The Folgers was at least 3 years old, but Chrissy didn't seem to mind and kept guzzling the stuff down as fast as I could mix it and warm it up in the microwave. I suppose she was still too hungover to notice. I could only imagine what kind of war must have been going on in the woman's stomach with that horrible concoction of stale instant coffee and pop-off. I grimaced inwardly and hoped she didn't suddenly hurl all over my kitchen floor. "How long have you and Kent known each other?" I asked. "Not long," she answered. "Well, just 2 weeks." "Long enough to become drinking buddies at least," I said jokingly. She looked away, seeming a little embarrassed. "Well, I wasn't really planning on doing that," she said, still looking away, her attention focused on my bare kitchen walls. I was a bachelor, but not a committed one. The committed ones I knew seemed to take great pains to decorate their living space. It was usually done, I thought, to impress anyone they happened to bring home. I wasn't a bachelor by my own choosing. My walls represented my inner mindset, I supposed. I didn't see any need to celebrate my lack of a domestic life. Chrissy looked back in my direction, and her smile returned. Maybe it was because she didn't see judgment in my eyes. I didn't judge her. Don't get me wrong. I didn't drink. Not then, at least. I hated the stuff. It almost destroyed me. I didn't approve of drinking a poison until it would alter your mind and make you do stupid things you normally wouldn't do. But I understood why a person would want to do it. I also understood what it was to regret things the morning after, when the buzz would wear off. So I didn't look down on Chrissy for it. I simply looked down on the alcohol. People could say whatever they wanted. The stuff was liquid death. I really don't do this, she said again, and I chose to say nothing in response this time, mainly because I thought she was saying it more to herself than me. Her eyes wandered about the kitchen with small, split-second glances, my way to see my reaction. I looked back at her and gave my best calm and neutral look. I had no idea what it was like to be an African-American woman in Utah. I could only at best imagine. It had to be intimidating and lonesome sometimes. Contrary to some beliefs, African Americans were not hated or ostracized in Mormon-dominated Utah, but they were most certainly a minority. The state's demographics were continually changing, but at that point I would have guessed there were still less than 1,000 African Americans in Utah County, and less than 10,000 in the state. Those statistics must have been disconcerting for a black person living there, and I guessed Chrissy was carefully gauging my reactions and thoughts to anything she said. I didn't know her yet, and the morning's shenanigans outside my front door had made me weary, but she was Kent's friend, and I was willing to give her a chance for that reason alone. Besides, you didn't meet a lot of people like Chrissy in Provo. She had me intrigued, if nothing else. I really like him, she said. I mean, he's not the kind of guy I usually date, but there's just something about the guy. How did you guys meet? I asked. Oh, the 21st century's version of a singles bar. Online. She smiled again as she took another drink out of her cup. You mean a dating site? I asked, surprised. I couldn't imagine Kent putting a profile on such a thing. She laughed a little. No. Kent? Her laughter was pleasant and luxurious, the type an intelligent and sophisticated woman might utter at a dinner party or in an art gallery. No, she said again, the mirth still in her voice. Her eyes resembled two amber-colored marbles as they shone with pleasure. It was actually on a gun forum. She studied me and began laughing again when she saw my reaction. You're surprised a black woman would be on a gun forum? She asked. I nodded, a little ashamed for showing it. Yeah, I said. I am. The usual denizens on a gun forum chew Copenhagen and listen to Chris Stapleton. She raised her chin and put her mug down. Her eyes narrowed, and it was then that I decided Chrissy was a beautiful woman. She reminded me a little of Carrie Champion from ESPN, just maybe a little heavier on the hips. The look she gave me wasn't an angry one. It was more of an amused and appraising one, and I began to see why Kent was dating her. She gave me a flirtatious wink, as if letting me know she knew what I was thinking. You don't think a black woman could be interested in guns? She asked. Well, I said, deciding it was okay to be open with her and not have my guard up. You are from Inglewood, so I realize you were born with one in your hand. But I pumped my eyebrows up and down a few times in a Groucho Marx imitation to show I was kidding. She smirked at this and gave me a playful slap on the shoulder. I'll have you know, I grew up in a home where guns were seen as means to an end, she said. My daddy owned hunting rifles, but he also owned handguns and shotguns, and none of those were for hunting deer. I nodded appreciatively. He taught me when I was 5 how to hold a handgun and how to shoot a rifle, she said, but he also taught me that they were for keeping us safe and, most of all, for keeping us free. She looked at me, studying my face. I kept her gaze, not wanting to interrupt. I nodded to let her know I was listening. He was from Georgia, she continued. He moved to L.A. in his 40s after retiring from the Air Force. That was in 1991. She looked at me expectantly, as if she expected some kind of reaction. She raised her eyebrows and added a "come on" gesture with her hands to help me with the answer. When I looked back at her helplessly, she blew out her breath and rolled her eyes. Rodney King riots, she said, exasperated, as if I were a 5th grader who had forgotten my times tables. Oh, I said, embarrassed. A little before my time, I guess. I would have been about 8 when they broke out. Well, I wasn't even born yet, so yeah, it was before my time as well, she said. But it had a huge impact on my daddy. You see, having grown up in Georgia, it was expected of him to hunt and know how to shoot. The Rodney King riots scared him to death. I guess they burned down a couple of stores less than half a mile from our house, and it looked like for a while they were going to have to evacuate the neighborhood. He told us kids that he sat up all night in the living room with his 12 gauge across his knees and his .357 Magnum on the coffee table, expecting them to come down our street and try breaking into our home to loot. He said if he didn't have those guns, we wouldn't have had a chance. I always thought he exaggerated how serious it all was, but I still got the point. Guns are dangerous, and yes, like you said, I was in Inglewood, and I did hear gunshots at night on a regular basis. But I wasn't raised by a drug-addicted welfare mom who taught me to believe having and using guns was a way of life. I was about to voice my innocence in thinking so, but she waved me off before I got the words out. I'm not saying that's what you think, she said. I'm saying that I recognize that's how many people think, and that isn't me. My daddy is a God-fearing Air Force captain and a soon-to-be retired mailman. He raised me right, regardless of what you saw earlier. After hearing that, I knew I had to say something. Chrissy, I was raised a Mormon and try to be a good one, but I've been every bit as blitzed as you were this morning, so stop apologizing for it, I said. She smiled at this, and I smiled back. It was then that Kent decided to make his appearance from the bedroom after using the bathroom. He looked like death and smelled almost as bad. I wrinkled my nose and held it with my right index finger and thumb. Whew, I said dramatically. You smell like a sewer, amigo. Are you sure you didn't do more than just puke on yourself? He gave a fake, mocking, silent laugh and sat down. Coffee, he said and groaned. Chrissy gave him a disgusted look. You could at least say please first, she said. Ken ignored her and repeated coffee while he rubbed his temples. It's all right, Chrissy, I said. He's a barbarian. I'm just glad he was at least willing to wear some clothes when he walked out here. Give me coffee or I just might decide not to, Kent said while looking down at the table. The mere thought of that got me moving, and I got a mug out of the cupboard. I made sure it was the one with the phrase, I'm still a jerk after the first cup, that a coworker had given me as a white elephant gift at a company Christmas party. I warmed up the noxious instant coffee for him and sat it in front of him. He either didn't notice the mug's writing, or he didn't care. But Chrissy gave me a wink after she read it. She then gave Ken a quick peck on the cheek and stood up. I need to go use the bathroom myself, and then we better get going, Kent, she said. Remember I have that client dinner tonight, and I need to get home to get ready. She went into the bathroom and closed the door. Kent only grunted in response and kept drinking his coffee. I washed out Chrissy's cup and put it in the dishwasher. I turned around and saw Kent looking at me with pained and sheepish eyes. His head was probably killing him. And even though I knew he deserved it, I still felt sorry enough for him to retrieve the bottle of Advil I kept in the cupboard above the stove. I shook out 2 capsules and handed them to him. He palmed them and then shoved them in his mouth. He quickly drank them down and grimaced as he looked at me. What is this made from? Used coffee grounds you got out of the dumpster? He asked. Only the best for you, my man, I said. He grimaced again but took another swig. I'm surprised you can even taste it after assaulting your taste buds with Popov, I said, amused. He immediately held up his hands in a warning gesture. Don't remind me, he said. Then he belched and got a sudden look on his face showing he might need to make an emergency dash to the sink. But his stomach seemed to subside and he instead took another drink of the Folgers. Kent, I said quietly but firmly. He looked up, catching the change of tone in my voice. I stared at him hard, and the sheepish look crept back into his eyes. How could you be so stupid? He looked down into his cup, not answering, and then looked back up and shook his head slightly. I'm sorry, man, he said. We shouldn't have come here. I don't agree, I said. That was actually the only smart thing you did. Better here than in a ditch. He nodded at this but didn't say anything. The door to the bathroom opened and Chrissy came out. I didn't want to get into a deep discussion with him in front of her. Plus, she had mentioned they needed to go. I decided I would save it. I was mad at the guy. The private investigation side of our business was solely in Kent's name, since he was the one who had the minimum 10,000 hours of documented investigative experience required in the state of Utah to open your own PI business. If he lost his license, I'd be flying solo on all our jobs, and doing so without legal standing within a bona fide investigation agency. I got a lead on a job, he said as he stood up. Oh, I asked. Yeah, but I'll tell you about it later, he replied. We got to get going. Chrissy came into the kitchen and stopped short, looking at him. Do you mean that missing girl? She asked. Kent shot her a look, and I could tell he didn't want to talk about it. Yeah, but right now ain't the time, babe, he said. Let's get out of Seth's hair. You need to get back, and I need to get out of these clothes before I catch rotting death man disease. They walked toward the door, and Kent opened it for Chrissy, then followed her out. I followed behind, and all three of us walked to Kent's Suburban. Kent opened the passenger door of the Suburban for Chrissy, then shut the door and walked over to the driver's side. He looked back at me as he opened the door, and I could see a little more confidence and light in his eyes. "It's quite something," he said. "I'll fill you in tomorrow." "Are you going into the shop at 9? The shop was our office. It was an old mechanic shop that we bought for cheap from a friend who got tired of turning wrenches and wanted out. We converted it into an office for our detective and bail recovery business. It was a dream come true for Kent since he liked to work on vehicles, and it was a good distraction for him when things were slow. It worked for me, too, since I had a worn-down expedition that was in constant need of Kent's automotive skills. "Yeah, I was planning on it," I said. "Good," he said. "I'll see you then. You're going to like it, Seth. It's a hot one, and it just might be the break we've been looking for." He climbed in the truck, and as he drove the Chevy out of the parking lot, I stood watching them, wondering what adventure my friend had in store for us. "Missing girl?" I asked myself out loud. I shrugged and went back into my apartment. Chapter 3. Next morning, I woke early to run on the treadmill at Anytime Fitness. I had found that by 33, I was starting to develop a middle-aged gut. I'd never been much of a runner, but after 3 months of regular stints on a treadmill, I could run a 5K in about 30 minutes. Pretty good, considering I couldn't have run even a mile only 2 months before. My line of work didn't actually require a lot of fitness, regardless of what television or pulp fiction had portrayed over the years. I spent most of my time either on the computer, tracking down personal information on people, or driving around interviewing the friends and family of bail skippers. It was surprising how often family and friends were willing to betray the whereabouts of the people we searched for. Usually our quarry owed someone money or had alienated himself via some offensive behavior, causing these people to gleefully help us apprehend the offender. The three major exceptions to this were girlfriends, mothers, and fellow gang members. I avoided talking to anyone in one of those categories unless we were desperate, and with gang members, you had the added threat of violence. I arrived at the shop at 9 and had time to get settled in by the time I heard Kent's Harley at 9:30. I was glad he was late, since I had paperwork that needed to be done. Our last client had claimed we overcharged him on surveillance hours, and he demanded receipts that would prove our time. The case had involved his suspicion that his business partner was going to the office late at night and using their co-owned equipment. The business was a small janitorial company on accounts he had set up only for himself. It was an extremely boring case, to say the least, but it had paid well and had the added benefit of extra billing for the hours Ken and I had spent watching their office. It was impossible to prove every minute we spent sitting in our vehicle, taking pictures and filming. All a P I can really do is show fast food receipts and the timestamp on the video itself. We had the timestamps on the video, but there was precious little in the way of receipts. Neither Kent nor I felt rich enough to buy any fast food as we surveilled the place. The time billed was significant, all in all, over 30 hours. At $25 an hour, that added up. It turned out the business partner had, indeed, been going behind his partner's back and setting up accounts on his own. We had video surveillance of him loading and unloading the equipment, as well as live footage of him inside different businesses working on the floors. It should have been enough to convince the client of our honesty, but he was still threatening a lawsuit in small claims court. I looked up from the paperwork as Kent walked in the front door, wearing his leathers and helmet. I put the record sheet with all the billing data on my desk and faced him. He saw me and gave a toothy Cheshire cat grin. "Sorry," he said, holding his hands up in a placating manner. "I got out of the house later than I planned." Our office was in American Fork, an agreed-upon halfway point between both of our homes. Kent lived in Midvale, and it normally would take about the same amount of time for us to get to the shop, but unfortunately, road work on I-15 near the point of the mountain easily added 15 minutes to Kent's commute during peak traffic times. Kent looked tired and grumpy. "Still hungover?" I asked. He sighed and sat down at his desk, which was kitty-corner to mine. "No," he said as he shook his head. "I just didn't sleep good last night." Chrissy made me go to that client thing of hers, and I didn't make it home till past 2 in the morning. You guys are moving fast, I said. He looked at me quizzically. She and I talked some yesterday while you were in the bathroom tossing your cookies, I explained. She said you guys only met 2 weeks ago. You're already drinking buddies and going to high-end dates with her clients. Kent shrugged noncommittally. I don't know, he said. She and I are hitting it off, but I don't know if you'd call us close yet. As far as last night goes, she just asked me to go since it was kind of a group date thing, and it was either me or one of her fellow workers in the office. She didn't want to go alone and look like a loser, so she asked me to go. It was not my thing, Seth. Total fancy suit and tie affair. I was like a Vegas prostitute at a prayer meeting. Tactful and gracefully put, as usual, I said sardonically. Well, he said defensively, it was true. Everyone there was either a stuffed shirt stockbroker or a friggin' lawyer. I felt like a fool. I honestly don't know how I could have helped her with her client. You should have seen the look on their faces when I said I was just like Dog the Bounty Hunter without the jail tats and Hulk Hogan hair. You really said that, I said. I was trying to lighten things up, Seth, he said. You know, dinner banter. I shook my head and peered out the front panel windows at the passing traffic. I looked back at him as he fidgeted with his wraparound sunglasses, looking anxious. I think he knew what I was about to say and wasn't sure how it would go. I want to talk about yesterday, Kent, I said in a serious tone. Kent nodded while still fidgeting with his sunglasses. Yeah, he said, still looking down. I know you do, Seth. How could you be that stupid, I asked, though I was more concerned than mad. He and I had both dealt with drinking problems in the past. Kent had, in fact, been the one to convince me to clean my life up. It was Kent who had helped me get my bounty hunter and private investigator licenses. His rationale, one that I accepted as logical at the time, and still did at that moment, was that I couldn't be a committed boozer and an effective investigator at the same time. He had been right. The job had helped a lot in keeping me sober, as well as being an avenue to get me out of the mental state I had been in. Kent got his start as a private investigator in Colorado during the early 2000s, and he continued being one in Utah when he moved back in 2009. The business was his, essentially, while I acted as an employee of the agency, as far as the law was concerned. In reality, we were business partners, and neither one of us was truly in charge of the other. I didn't have any reason to believe Kent had a resurging drinking problem, but I was concerned that a man in his 30s with both child support and alimony to pay to an ex-wife would be willing to risk his livelihood by doing something as destructive and stupid as driving under the influence. What's going on? I asked. Nothing, he said, finally making eye contact with me. Nothing is going on. Chrissy just likes to party, and I got caught up in it. She invited me down to a club to have some drinks with a few of her friends, and it got out of hand. It's been a while since I drank very much, so it went to my head fast. That's all, Seth. It really isn't any more complicated than that. It was more than a few drinks at a club, I said. There was a 6-pack worth of empty beer cans in your truck and an empty bottle of rot gut. Those alone would have put you in a lockup if you had been pulled over. Kent didn't answer. He shrugged and spread his hands in a "what can I say" gesture. And you decided to get into your truck and drive, while intoxicated, down to my place? I asked, incredulous. That just happened, he said. It wasn't planned. I just wanted to introduce her to my business partner, and in my drunken haze it seemed like a good idea. She's fascinated by what we do. She thinks it's some kind of glamorous life, like Magnum PI or something. I think she half expected you to look like Tom Selleck. He laughed and rubbed the back of his neck. Who opened my door? I asked next. Ken appeared genuinely confused at the question. What do you mean? He asked. My door was open yesterday morning when you guys woke me up, I explained. Who opened it? Kent looked at me with a furrowed brow, not answering me. I don't know, he finally said after a few awkward seconds. Chrissy, maybe? I was passed out, or close to it, by the time we reached the point of the mountain. It was a miracle I even made it to the Suburban from the bar. I was so gone. I barely remember climbing in. I guess she must have done it, Seth. I honestly don't know. I bit my lower lip, thinking. I knew I had locked it. I always locked it. The apartment complex I lived in was full of guys with arrest records and drug habits. It was a miracle, in fact, that my place hadn't been cleaned out while I was asleep, with the door being wide open like that. Forget it, I said. I must have left it open when I got home. I didn't believe that for a second, but I didn't want to argue with Kent about it. It was obvious by his expression he didn't know anything about it. How old is Chrissy? I asked. Why? Just tell me, I pressed. How old is she? He scratched his ear with his index finger and spoke in a guarded voice. 21, but she's gonna be 22 in a week, he added quickly. Okay, I said. Nothing wrong with that. In fact, I'm impressed. Well, I know she's young, Seth, Kent said, but she's got a degree in business economics from UCLA and is in a master's program at the University of Utah. She's a financial analyst for Goldman Sachs. She's really got her act together. Yeah, I saw that yesterday, I said. That's not fair, he said in an annoyed tone. She was drunk and didn't really know what she was doing. I know, I said. I talked to her after you two sobered up. I like her. She seems like a really nice girl. Girl? He asked pointedly. Girl? Are you saying she's too young for me? No, I said. I told you. I'm impressed, but… Uh-huh, he replied. You do think she's too young for me. You know, Seth, maybe you're just jealous. I haven't seen you even go on a date in over 6 months. Kent, I just said I didn't think there was anything wrong with her being 21, I said. I do wonder, though, if she were a little older and had kids of her own, she probably wouldn't have been willing to drive while drunk all the way down to Provo. You could have killed someone. She woke up all my neighbors laying on that train horn of yours. It's a miracle the cops didn't come by. You live close to the tracks in that ghetto dive you call home, Kent said. They probably thought it really was a train. Whatever, I said. That's not the big issue here. The big issue is that you're hanging around a girl who likes to party like a 21-year-old. You're a 35-year-old with a kid to take care of. You're supposed to know better. Kent didn't respond to that but stood up, put on his wraparounds, and began walking toward the front door. I looked after him, trying to gauge how mad he was. Was it something I said? I called out to his retreating back. He didn't answer but stuck his right index finger up in a wait-a-minute gesture and walked out the front door. I had no idea what to make of the strange behavior. I watched him open the back door of his Chevy and pull out a medium-sized black duffel bag, the kind you might see at a gym lining the edge of a basketball court. He came back in and dropped it on my desk. I heard a clunk of something metallic inside. Your bag of tricks? I asked with a quizzical look. Yeah, well, you could say that, I guess, he said. Open it up and see. I opened the duffel and peered in to see a pearl-handled 1911. It was beautiful and the real thing, a genuine Colt. What give? I asked him. That is a $3,000 handgun, he said. I let out a soft whistle of appreciation. It's not my birthday, so I don't get it, I said. What's up with the fancy .45? It belongs to our new client, he said. This was typical Kent. It would seem flippant to someone who didn't know him, but I knew him well enough to be aware of what he was doing. He both loved and hated melodrama, hated it when it was someone else's doing, and loved it whenever he got to play the lead role. The fact that he said new client caused me to forget yesterday's events and focus on the here and now. We hadn't picked up a real detective case since the janitorial guy, and since that was temporarily tied up legally, we hadn't seen a dime of payment yet. We needed money, and we needed it now. Running down bail jumpers could pay decently well, but we hadn't been getting enough of that either. We were based in Utah County after all, and we just didn't get the volume we would have if we were in Salt Lake. This had been a sore subject between me and Kent, and he was close to convincing me to open a small satellite office in South Salt Lake. I hated the idea with a passion. The differences in crime rates and, therefore, criminal demeanor were like night and day between the two counties. I liked the much slower pace and generally much better behaved bail runners south of the point, but I had to admit that a lower crime rate also meant fewer criminals skipping their court dates. If we were going to be people who brought criminals back to the law, we had to go where more of the criminals were. The same applied to the private investigator end of the business as well. Okay, I said, tell me about it. He walked over to his desk, grabbed his office chair, and rolled it over close to mine. He sat down, took off his wraparounds, and placed them on my desk next to the duffel bag. That gun was given to me by our client's wife, Kent said. Oh yeah, I said. Why's that? She was afraid he was going to use it. On himself, I asked. Nope. Her? I tried again. Nope, he said. On a BYU professor. I stared at him, waiting for him to say more. He didn't volunteer anything. He wants to shoot a BYU professor? I asked. And this is our client? What have you gotten us into, Kent? Kent held his hands up. Just hold on, he said. Hear me out before you draw any conclusions. He reached over, picked up the duffel bag, and then placed it on the floor. He rolled his chair snug to my desk, put his elbows on top, and looked me in the eye. I got a call from this guy last week asking me if we did missing person searches, Kent explained. I told him we typically didn't do such things, but yeah, we do that. I raised my eyebrows. Yeah, I might have been a little dishonest there, Kent said. I didn't tell him we had actually never done such a thing, unless you want to count the bail jumpers, but I at least was honest about the part of being willing to do it. You told him we did missing persons, not that we were willing to do it, I said. Kent shrugged. We do people searches all the time, Seth. Think of how many people we've had to track down in the past few years. How much of a difference is there? He asked rhetorically. A lot, I said. You gave the impression that it was something we're set up for. It could make us vulnerable to litigation, something I'll remind you we're already dealing with. Kent began drumming the fingers of his right hand on the top of my desk and looked up to the ceiling, contemplating what I had said. He sighed and dropped his eyes back down to mine. Look, Seth, maybe I wasn't totally honest with the guy, but there are two things that make up for it, he said. One, he's already been working with the cops for almost 2 years, and they've got nothing. He's a good guy. I like him. You've met him then? I asked. Yeah, Kent said guiltily. He sighed again and scratched the top of his head with the fingers of his right hand. I should have told you about it earlier, but until 2 days ago, it wasn't anything like a shore case. And, well, frankly, you didn't think I'd support the idea, I finished for him. He drew in a deep breath and said, yeah, as he let it out. I didn't think you would. And we need the money, Seth. That's the second thing. This guy's loaded, okay? And he's going to pay good money. Cash money. I stipulated that right from the beginning. He said yes to that? I asked. Yeah, he doesn't have a problem with it, Kent said. I've already got 3,000 right here. He reached into the duffel and pulled out a small brown paper bag I hadn't noticed when I looked in before. He opened the paper bag and pulled out a stack of $100 bills with a rubber band fastened around it. It looked like dirty money from a drug deal, and I was immediately nervous about touching it. I'm a little wary about a guy who would be willing to give you that much money, in cash, up front, Kent, I said. There's something about all this you aren't telling me. Kent looked offended, and I regretted saying it. I'd learned to trust his views over the years, and he was probably expecting a different reaction from me. This time I let out my own sigh and gave a dismissive gesture with my hand. Forget about it for now, I said. Let's put that on the shelf for a minute, and you give me the details on the case. At this, Kent immediately lost the offended look, and his eyes lit up with excitement. Seth, I'm just going to tell you, he said. This is the break we've been looking for. Okay, I said, so tell me. You remember that BYU co-ed that went missing about 3 years ago, he said? The one with the blonde ponytail and blue eyes on the billboards all over Utah County? I looked at him perplexed. A BYU co-ed with blonde hair and blue eyes, I shrugged. Serious? There's gotta be at least 1,000 young women on that campus with those features, Kent. I don't know who you're talking about. Come on, Seth, he prodded. You got to. It was huge news. Everyone was saying how much she looked like Elizabeth Smart. It was starting to stir a memory for me, but I still couldn't quite picture who he was talking about. Then it suddenly flooded back. I had just received my PI license at the time, and most of my attention was spent on the cases I was involved with. But the comparisons to Elizabeth Smart jarred my memory. Smart's case had been huge both nationally and in Utah, and anything associated with it was bound to grab your attention. Elizabeth Smart had been abducted from her home when she was 14. She had remained missing for 9 months, and most people, including myself at the time, assumed she was dead. But she had miraculously turned up, not only alive, but kidnapped by a strange cult figure named Brian David Mitchell. The peculiar circumstances of her rescue had only fueled the notoriety of it all. I think I remember something about it now, I said. Finally, a name came into my head. Sandra Patterson, I said proudly. Nope, but close, he replied. I gave him a dirty look. The guy was always showing me up on trivia, especially the useless kind, like what year a movie came out or when an actor died. He smiled. You were close. It was Samantha Palmerson. Okay, I said. He had my total attention now. The disappearance came back to me as he spoke, and as he expounded the details, I replayed the story in my head. She had been a sophomore at BYU and an elementary education major. She had last been seen walking alone out of the Wilkinson Center at 8 p.m. on a Friday night. A witness who claimed to have recognized her, a girl who was good friends with Samantha's dorm roommate, described her as distraught and crying. The witness claimed Samantha had crossed the street in front of the Wilkinson Center and headed toward the visitor parking lot. This was the last known sighting of Samantha. The next day, Samantha's roommate reported her missing. Her disappearance was first reported to the campus police and later to the Provo police. Because Samantha's story had been erroneously linked to the Smart disappearance, it had gained brief national attention. A few details that Kent told me, however, seemed new to me. One was that there had been a second sighting of her that night. This one was perhaps 15 minutes after the Wilkinson Center account. It was less reliable, however. The person who gave the report wasn't sure it had been Samantha, plus the details surrounding the sighting seemed far-fetched to the police. The man claimed to have seen Samantha on 9th East in the accompaniment of two dark complex males who led her to a black SUV and forced her in. The Provo police took the report seriously enough to canvass the area for any other sightings of the SUV, but they had come up with nothing. They eventually dismissed the man's claim because he had an extensive history of drug and alcohol-related criminal convictions. Kent didn't have the report with him. He had, in fact, heard all of this over the phone while speaking to our client, Samantha's father. And he has this report, I asked. Yup, Kent said. And he'll give us a copy. Yup, he said again. He said he would give us a copy and everything else he has as soon as I called him back, confirming we would take the case. I smiled. You told him you needed to check with your mommy first? I asked sarcastically. No, I told him I had to clear it with my hemorrhoid of a business partner, Kent said back, mimicking my tone. So when did you get the money and the gun? Kent broke eye contact with me and looked out the front window. I followed his gaze and studied the passing traffic on Main Street. He and his wife met me here on Saturday, Kent said in a tone reminiscent of a man confessing to a priest. It made me turn my attention back to his face in surprise. He wouldn't look back, and I was a little confused. He certainly didn't need to clear something like that with me. He finally looked back at me, and I realized I had mistaken embarrassment for shame. I felt like kicking myself. There was an awkward silence for a few seconds. Well, it's your business, Kent. You don't need to get my okay to meet with a client, I said in an effort to lighten things up, though it was obvious what was actually bothering him. The poor guy had spent the Thanksgiving holiday alone and didn't want to admit it. I wasn't going to ask, but I was certain Chrissy had gone home for it, and I had spent it with my mother in Lehigh. I often forgot that my business partner had nothing like family in his life other than an ex-wife and a daughter who he only saw on weekends twice a month. Kent had never struck me as sentimental, but spending holidays alone could be hard on you. If I tried to bring it out in the open, he'd just act like he didn't know what I was talking about. I decided the best thing to do was to get us back on topic. So you met with them on Saturday, and then what? He gave you the money and she gave you the gun? He looked relieved at the change in mood and smiled a little, letting me know he guessed at what I was thinking. Yeah, he gave me the $3,000 as a retainer, Kent said. That's what he called it. I didn't argue with him. That's more money than we've seen for a while. The gun was, like I told you, from his wife. After we finished our meeting, his wife had said she needed to use the bathroom. She left the gun sitting on the wash counter. Under it, I found a folded piece of paper with a phone number written on it. It was Mrs. Palmerson's personal cell phone number. Kent sat back in his chair and looked at me. I stared back, waiting for more. I knew he was waiting for me to ask a question or utter some kind of expression of amazement. Keep going, I said. Well, there isn't a lot more to tell, he said. The gun, I asked. The desire to kill the BYU professor? Right, well, that leads to the last of it, Kent said. She told me about how upset Mr. Palmerson was at the professor and how she didn't feel safe with him having the gun. She asked me to keep it until he calmed down. I said, sure, no problem. It's a nice piece. It's hard to find an actual Colt 1911 in that kind of condition. Was it loaded? I asked. Kent nodded. Federal tactical bonded. I raised my eyebrows in appreciation. It was a line of ammunition made by Federal to be used by law enforcement. I think it's safe to say he was serious about hurting someone, I said. Kent nodded. I don't fault him for it, he said. If you're going to carry for protection, you might as well go as heavy as you can. Or if you're planning on murdering someone, I interjected. Yeah, that too, he replied. So tell me exactly what he told you, I said, continuing to press for details. Kent looked annoyed for a brief second. I guessed he didn't like the fact that he was in a subordinate position and having to explain himself. Too bad. There was no way I was going to agree to any of this until I had heard it all first. You know how these missing person things go, Seth, he began. They're huge for maybe a week or two, longer if there's confirmed sightings, or if, like in the Smarts case, you have connected relatives that can hire PR people to prime the press about it. I don't think that's a fair thing to say about the Smart family, I said. I'm not saying that to besmirch them, Kent said. I think they did exactly what they should have done. They had the means in the way, and they made the best use of it. But there's a lot of truth to what I said. The public loses interest fast if there aren't any juicy details. They want to hear about jealous boyfriends or cheating husbands, maybe a drug connection or two. But they move on real quick otherwise. There's always a new scandal in Washington to talk about or some celebrity in self-destruct mode. Palmerson himself took over the effort to find her when the Provo police put the case on the back burner. He found some juicy details that neither the Provo police nor the university police ever made public. I'm frankly amazed none of it ever made it into the media. It wasn't from a lack of trying either. I guess the old guy personally went to all the major network stations in Utah and got nowhere. He thinks it's a cover-up by the LDS Church. Because of the BYU professor? I asked. Is that where you're going? Yup, Kent said while nodding his head. He was really excited now, and I found myself becoming guarded. Kent was raised a Mormon, and at his core, I think he believed in the religion, but he had a lot of hang-ups about it. His parents had divorced when he was 5, and his father blamed the Mormon church for the breakup. His father had never been an ardent believer and confessed to Kent's mother that he had only become a Mormon to please her. When the marriage went sour, so did Kent's father's support for the church. Kent's mother mostly raised him after the divorce, but his father was caustic in his attitude about Kent having any involvement with the Mormon church, and he had regularly condemned it to Kent whenever he visited him. He opposed Kent being baptized when he turned 8, and he fought his mother bitterly about Kent being ordained to the Aaronic priesthood when he turned 12. To add to all this, the social stigma of being raised in a single home due to divorce and being extremely poor resulted in him not fitting in well with other young men in his congregation. By the time Kent turned 15, he had refused to have anything to do with the church. I learned all this from conversations we had during what I call the binge days, a 6-month period in which we had both been mostly intoxicated. Because of Kent's bitterness toward the Mormon church and anything relating to it, I saw a need to be careful about a supposed connection between a BYU professor and the missing girl. But I would listen to what he had to say and then draw my own conclusions about its veracity. Okay, what about the BYU professor? I asked. Kent sat up and shifted into a more comfortable position. This is a good one, he said. According to her father, Samantha was part of a do-gooder group at BYU. It was a private club that went to local elementary schools in lower-income areas and helped teach the kids how to keep active and exercise. She was on the track team at BYU and pretty good, according to her father. I Googled it, and her name was mentioned as one of the winners in relay races during her freshman year. So don't tell me, I said, interrupting him, she had some kind of liaison with the BYU professor that was in charge of the program. Look, keep quiet and let me finish, Kent said. I shut my mouth and gave him a go-ahead motion with my right hand. A Professor Kenneth Wilding was, and I think still is, in charge of the program, Kent said. I guess that's the big thing now. You do community service as part of your college education. It doesn't matter what it is, so long as it's something done for free and benefits the community somehow. Well, this was Samantha's choice to fulfill the requirement. She needed to do 15 hours for an ethics and values class. All of this is coming from her father? I asked. Yeah, but he got it from her roommate and friends, he said. How? I asked. He said he went to the BYU campus and asked around, Kent said. This Professor Wilding, according to some of Samantha's friends and other kids in the group, got pretty friendly with her. Pretty friendly? I asked, interrupting again. Kent gave me a disapproving look, but he nodded in agreement. Yeah, and the way you're thinking, he continued. Her friends claimed the two of them were often alone in his office during off hours on campus. When a few of them had confronted Samantha about it, she told them it was so he could help her with an application for an internship at a resort and spa in Aspen, Colorado, that coming summer. Sounds reasonable, I said. Yeah, I suppose, Kent said. But her dad said her friends were very suspicious of the relationship she and this Wilding guy developed. They said he seemed to always go out of his way to help her and spend time with her. They just got a vibe from the both of them that made them wonder. So what? I shrugged. They were both adults. Kent raised his eyebrows in mock astonishment. So what? He asked. We're talking BYU here, and this Wilding guy is married, plus he was, and still is, a member of a stake presidency. You got that from the dad as well, man? I asked. Kent nodded. What's the dad's opinion of the Mormon church? I asked. Kent looked confused and shrugged his shoulders. I don't know. What does that have to do with anything? He asked derisively. Tons, I said. I have no interest in chasing down a rumor for a guy who has a bone to pick with the church. Nuh-uh, Kent said, shaking his head. That's not the vibe I got from this guy at all. He had one goal, to find his daughter. It's not some hidden anti-Mormon agenda. Then why such focus on the BYU professor? I asked. Because of the circumstances, Kent said. Because of the trail Palmerson began to discover once he started talking to the people who knew Samantha right before she disappeared. Kent's eyes were wide and his voice rose just short of shouting. I wanted to counter that everything Dustin Palmerson had told him was circumstantial and conjecture, but I thought I had been pushing too hard and Kent was ready to get angry. I decided to tone it down on my end and listen more so he could get it all out in the open. It's not just wrong that the guy was married, Kent continued, but you got the added issue that it was with a student. Classic sexual harassment and a huge violation of BYU's moral code. This gives him some pretty good reasons to make Samantha become a missing person. I scrunched up my face in distaste. What? He asked indignantly. It can't happen because he's a good Mormon boy in the stake presidency? No, it's not that, I replied. I just don't see the glee in it that you do. I hope that it isn't true. Kent laughed a little derisively at this and put his wraparounds back on his face as he stood up. You're leaving? I asked. Kent nodded and said, I got a bunch of errands to get done today. Natalie has a training meeting after work, and I agreed to pick up Wendy from school and watch her until Natalie gets home. If I don't get a move on, I'll never make it. Kent and Natalie shared custody of their 7-year-old daughter, and Kent's flexible schedule often meant he filled in when his ex-wife wasn't free. Okay, I said, but Kent, I'm going to need to talk to the dad myself. It's not that I don't trust. He was nodding and giving me a knowing smile. What? I asked, confused. But you don't trust me, Kent said, still smiling. That's not true, I said forcefully. Not with this kind of stuff, Seth, Kent said. You don't think I can be objective enough not to jump on some kind of anti-Mormon witch hunt or something? He had been partially right. I had seen a need to be absolutely sure there wasn't any prejudice involved. That was the thing about prejudice. You could be prejudiced and not even know it. Stories like the one Kent told about Wilding could destroy someone's life, and I wasn't going to be involved if there was only suspicion and innuendos. I wanted hard proof to all the allegations if I was going to put my name on it. Kent kept nodding with the knowing smile. Relax, Seth, he said. I'm one step ahead of you. You're meeting with him this afternoon. The dad or the professor? I asked. Kent laughed. I already know the professor won't be able to meet with you for a few days. He's in Ireland right now, he said. Okay, well that settles it with the professor, but how am I supposed to meet with the dad? Hasn't he gone home to Pocatello by now? I said. He did, Kent replied, but he came back down here to meet with us. Or I should say you. He's got a box of stuff he's collected. He'll let us have it after you meet with him. Kent swiped his index finger on his phone and quickly typed. A second later, my phone announced I had a text. I looked at my phone and saw that Kent had sent me contact information for Dustin Palmerson, plus an address and time for the meeting. He wants to meet in Salt Lake? I asked, annoyed. Yeah, at a restaurant attached to the hotel he's staying in, Kent said. Can you do that? I sighed. I guess, I said. I need to make a stop in Orem today. It's going to cause me to backtrack a lot. He patted me on the back as he began walking toward the door. It's good for you, he said. It builds character. Uh-huh, I said to his back and set my phone despondently on my desk. Kent went out, got on his motorcycle, and filled the garage office with Harley-Davidson vibrations until he pulled away. I opened the drawer underneath the top of my desk and took out the pen and pad of paper I always kept there. It was very retro of me, but I had made it a habit to never leave client info or any kind of potentially sensitive information on my phone in case I lost it or it got stolen. So far, none of our cases had been anything close to being high profile, but this case had made national headlines, albeit very briefly. Kent was right. This could indeed be the break we'd been looking for. We had maybe $500 in the company account, and I had even less in my own bank account. The loan payment for the shop was due in a week, and I doubted either one of us could come up with the money to cover it. I walked into the garage where my Expedition was parked. I had pulled it in with the idea that I would use the guilt Kent felt about yesterday to manipulate him into changing the oil. Next time, my man, you can run, but you can't hide, I said out loud, my voice echoing off the concrete walls of the garage. The garage had 2 bays. My vehicle was parked in the bay closest to the office. In the other bay sat a 2005 Honda Odyssey. It was our surveillance vehicle. It was painted tan, a color proven to attract less attention, and had darkened windows. A minivan in the state of Utah was as common as baby strollers and green Jell-O salad. It easily blended into neighborhoods, including more upscale neighborhoods, since people had a tendency to hold on to minivans for long periods. The back seats had been removed to accommodate a prolonged stay. Inside the van, we had a small portable fridge, the type truckers often used in their rigs, a battery-operated fan for warm weather, and a small beanbag to lie down on when sitting in the driver's seat became too uncomfortable. I got into my own vehicle, started it, and ignored the loud clatter of worn rings from the out-of-tune engine. I opened the text from Kent, looked the address up on Google Maps. The Kingston Hotel, huh? I said out loud. I sucked air in between my teeth as I pinched the display to zoom in on the location. It was downtown, close to Temple Square. I moaned a little in exasperation. It was going to be a 45-minute drive up there. I could only guess how long the meeting with Dustin Palmerson would last. He was likely an angry and despondent father and might spend an hour complaining about inept police work. Then it was another 45 minutes back down to Orem. As I looked at the map, I felt a sudden pang of guilt when I saw the word Leahy. Leahy was where I grew up and where my mother still lived. I needed to go by her place and check in on her. She had complained to me about muscle cramps the last time I saw her. She was 63 and lived alone in the home I grew up in. The muscle cramps were probably just the result of aging, but my father's sudden death years ago made me paranoid about her. After my brother's death and my divorce, she was literally the only family I had in the world. But seeing my lawyer had to take precedence. My ex-wife had been making noise about a joint savings account we'd had when we were married. She was claiming I had withdrawn all the money from the account before our divorce was finalized and therefore owed her $1,000. It was ridiculous, considering we'd never had more than a couple hundred in savings when we were married. I was sure there were many good lawyers in the world, people who went to law school with the sole desire to help others in trouble. But divorce attorneys, despite providing a needed service, had become more than I could stomach. Take mine, for example. I had learned over the years to always see him in person because he counted every phone call the same as a face-to-face meeting. The consistently dwindling retainer I had paid him during my divorce was down to a few $100s. I could either see him at his office and force him to actually spend some time on my case, or I could call him and maybe get a line or two of half-wit advice and be charged the same either way. The problem was the guy was never in his office past 4 on Mondays. It was going to be a stretch to make it back to Orem in time. I cursed under my breath and backed out of the garage. Chapter 4. He restaurant connected to the Kingston Hotel turned out to be a Denny's. I cringed when I saw the familiar red and yellow sign. It was nothing to do with the restaurant itself. It just reminded me of all the early mornings I had spent at them while nursing a hangover. I hadn't set foot in one since I'd quit drinking. I felt a tiny bit anxious as I parked the Expedition and walked toward the front entrance. I was very confident in my sobriety, but I worried a little about old memories of bad times distracting me while trying to talk to a potential client. The first conversation was the most important one of any case. It was where you would feel out a client. It was like a fishing expedition for deceit and hidden agendas. If I felt uncomfortable, or if I thought I was being lied to, I would walk away and cut bait. The first meeting was also often the best chance we had to get a solid lead on what we were being hired to do. It was when your mind was still fresh and free of bias. Plus, Dustin Palmerson lived in a town over 200 miles away, which meant follow-up meetings with him would be both difficult and expensive. I knew that meeting with him might be our only one-on-one interview, so I had to be on my game. I walked in and was greeted by a uniformed girl who looked to be about 18. "Good afternoon," she said. "Just you?" "Actually, I'm meeting someone here," I told her. She had an immediate look of recognition. "Do you mean Mr. Palmerson?" she asked. "That's him," I said. "I'm guessing he's been waiting." "Yes, I'll take you over to his table." I followed her to a table and found a white-haired man in his mid to late 70s. He was heavy-set, but not the kind of weight you typically see on a fat person. He had the look of a man who was probably once muscular and powerful, but became fat. So his girth was more prevalent around his stomach and chest than elsewhere. I stuck out my hand in greeting and said, "Hello, Mr. Palmerson. My name is Seth Greenwood," he said in the gravelly voice of a lifetime smoker. He wiped his hands on a napkin, then shook my hand. "Yes, I know. Your business partner Kent already told me your name. Sit down and get something to eat. I'm paying." I sat down in one of the chairs opposite of him and grabbed a menu that was resting on the table. Palmerson was eating what appeared to be a grilled cheese sandwich and fries. I noticed with some amusement that he was eating the fries by stabbing them with a fork, then dipping them in a dab of ketchup he had squirted on his plate. I never understood that. Fries were meant to be eaten with your fingers. "Your partner, Kent, is an interesting fellow," he said, while looking up at me from under bushy white eyebrows. "That's an understatement, Mr. Palmerson." "Call me Dustin," he said. "Accountants and bankers call me Mr. Palmerson, and I don't trust any of them." I smiled and thought to myself that he should add lawyers to his list. "Okay, Dustin," I said. "Then you call me Seth." The waitress came back to the table and asked if I was ready to order. I hadn't actually paid any attention to the menu. I'd been using it as cover as I sized up my potential client. So I hurriedly studied it and saw the number 3 lunch special was some kind of burger with fries. I was tempted to order it, but decided against it when I thought it would force me to stay longer than I desired if the meeting went bad. "I'll just have a Coke," I said, and smiled as I returned the menu. "Okay, I'll have that Coke right out to you," she said, smiling back. I turned my attention back to Dustin. "Kent already told me a lot about the case," I said to Dustin. "Oh, so you're taking it then?" He looked annoyed. "Why am I having lunch here with you? I could be halfway home by now." "Oh no, that's not a sure thing yet," I said. "I do in fact need to meet with you." He frowned. "I thought you just said your partner had already told you everything," he asked. "I did," I replied. He shrugged and his stare became hardened. "I don't like having my time wasted. I already told him everything I know. I'm an old man. My doctor has told me it's dangerous for me to drive at night. Early stages of glaucoma." "I'm sorry," I said. He looked at me bewildered. "About what?" he asked. "About what?" I repeated, confused. He put his half-eaten grilled cheese down and wiped his mouth with his napkin. "You said you're sorry. Sorry about what?" His voice rose and had a touch of anger, causing several people to look over at us. I pretended not to notice. "Your glaucoma," I answered. "Oh," he said, instantly diffused. He waved his hand dismissively. "Who cares about that? I'm 76 years old with a bad heart. I probably don't have more than 5 years left anyway. My health and life aren't the issue. I want to know where my daughter is and if she's all right." So do I replied.